Sadly, the United States does not really expound upon the great sacrifices that were made by the Chinese people, the contributions of China to World War II. So unfortunately, in the United States, the story of World War II is told from the perspective of the United States. The U.S. is painted as a victorious leader.
Each time when we commemorate our victory over fascism, there would be some voices saying that we're doing this to spread hatred. But that's just the opposite. We're doing that for anything but hatred. We're doing that for peace.
In China and the Philippines may have been limited by geography, our people were united by a common struggle for freedom. That legacy should inspire us today to deepen our cooperation, not only in honoring the past, but in facing the future challenges together with mutual respect and open dialogue.
The Chat Lounge. Chat Lounge.
Chat Lounge.
The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Hello and welcome to Chat Lounge. I'm Xu Yawen. 2025 marks 80 years since China's victory in the war of resistance against the Japanese aggression, a pivotal chapter in both China's struggle and the global fight against the fascism. 80 years ago, countries across the globe united in the struggle against the fascism, and China, as the primary battleground in the East during the Second World War, made tremendous sacrifices, both in lives and resources, to resist the Japanese imperialism. While often overlooked, these efforts were pivotal. They gave the Allies the critical time and space they needed to turn the tide in both Europe and the Pacific. On today's episode, we take a step back to reflect on how these pivotal moments in history have shaped our present, the lessons we can draw from them, and how we can all play a part in building a more peaceful world moving forward. We have got three media professionals joining us from around the world. In the studio with me is my colleague Dou Hongyu, CGTN Radio reporter. Hongyu, it's great to have you.
Great to be here.
On the line, we're joined by Wes Cabangon, operations advisor and journalist at Business Mirror in Philippines, Garland Nixon, a radio talk show host and political analyst from the United States. Thank you for joining us, Wes and Garland.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for having us.
Hongyu, understand that you traveled across China, especially from the northern part of Heilongjiang and Liaoning to the southern Shanghai and Zhejiang, and you have spoken with a number of people who are either experts or collectors of cultural relics related to the Chinese people's war of resistance against the Japanese aggression. So share with us what you have discovered along the way.
Well, sure. We talked to several passionate collectors who spent decades looking for the objects left by the World War II. And we've also talked to the sons of veterans who fought in the battles on the Chinese battlefield. We've looked for their stories for our new podcast, The Unyielding East, China's World War II Relics. But what touched me the most is their spirits, that the veterans, the soldiers, and the civilians who fought during those battles. And we went to the former home of a general, also a veteran, whose name is Zhu Fuxing. We went to their home. His sons preserved his objects from the war. And his son told me that Zhu Fuxing, the general, fought in the Battle of Shanghai in 1937. He was ordered to take his men to defend several places in Shanghai, and he managed to do it. But in the end, he lost 2/3 of his soldiers. But the Japanese were still coming again and again, and they couldn't leave. They didn't give up. In the end, General Zhu Fuxing fought for 7 straight days and nights without any sleep until he was shot and lost consciousness on the battlefield. Then he was transported to another city, Hangzhou, for treatment. And during his treatment, one of his soldiers brought him his suitcase from the battlefield because there was some food in his suitcase that could help him with his treatment. But when he got the food, he criticized the soldier and said, "You are not supposed to bring it to me. Give it back to the battlefield. Give it back to the soldiers who are still fighting for Shanghai." I think it is such spirits of sacrificing one's own benefits for a greater cause that helped China to stand till the last in the war. And in the end, there were 3 bullets in the body of Zhu Fuxing. The doctor took out 2 of them, with the rest one only 1 centimeter away from his heart. So he had to live with the bullet for the rest of his life. So it is such spirits that touched me the most. And we want to tell them to more audience in the world.
Well, that's just very lucky to hear that, even though he got the bullet, but he still survived from the war.
Yes, definitely.
You talk about the Battle of Shanghai in 1937. How critical is that war to the overall Chinese people's fight against the Japanese aggression?
Well, after the full-scale invasion of China started in 1937, the Chinese people were not that confident, to be honest, because we had very poor weapons and the enemies had advanced weapons, like they have artilleries and tanks and airplanes, but the Chinese soldiers were using mainly simple guns. So some said they were fighting a losing battle. But that war convinced people that China could do a lot in their resistance against Japanese aggression. And before that, Japan said they were about to occupy China within 3 months.
Yeah.
But just the Battle of Shanghai managed to hold them back for 3 months. So that gave the Chinese people a lot of confidence, that also astonished the international arena, especially China's allies like the United States and the Soviet Union, and let them realize the strategic importance of the Eastern battlefield.
Wes, let me come to you now. When Chinese soldiers and civilians were fighting hard against the Japanese invasion, Japan also launched its attack on the Philippines in December 1941. So what kind of suffering did the Filipino people experience at that time, and how did they resist the Japanese aggression and coordinate with Chinese resistance efforts?
Hi, Yawen. Again, it's an honor to join this meaningful discussion. In war, there's no true victors, only lessons paid for with unimaginable human suffering. The Japanese invasion in 1941 brought immense suffering to the Filipino people. Cities were devastated, countless civilians were displaced or killed, and our soldiers notably endured the horrors of the Bataan Death March, where POWs had to march over 100 kilometers over 5 days to be placed into prison camps where soldiers suffered even further. But in the face of that hardship, Filipinos rose up through both organized military defense and grassroots guerrilla movements that carried the resistance forward even after the formal forces had surrendered. It was in this spirit of shared resistance that the WWII, an anti-Japanese Chinese-Filipino guerrilla unit, stood shoulder to shoulder with Filipino fighters, actually. The Philippines has had a long history with China and has become home to many ethnic Chinese, with a vast majority being migrants from the Fujian province, actually. And during the war, the WWII started with only 7 rifles, and they managed to gain more munitions through recouping more weapons from their enemies and their surroundings. At their height, they numbered at about 700 strong, and they liberated several towns in the resistance efforts from Japanese control here in my country. It wasn't just men or fighting either. The WWII included women and children as scouts as well, to help inform them of how to best operate from the mountains in their efforts in the city. I actually had the honor of meeting some of the descendants of the WWII during our Philippine Independence Day celebration in Beijing. A lot of them have re-immigrated back into China. Their bravery stands as a living symbol of how Chinese and Filipinos once fought as one. While direct wartime coordination between China and the Philippines may have been limited by geography, our people were united by a common struggle for freedom. That legacy should inspire us today to deepen our cooperation, not only in honoring the past, but in facing the future challenges together with mutual respect and open dialogue.
Garland, hearing what Hongyu and Wes have just shared, could you tell us how much do you know about the wartime stories from the Eastern Front, and also for general American people, how aware are they of China's critical role during the Second World War?
So, unfortunately, in the United States, the story of World War II is told from the perspective of the United States. The U.S. is painted as a victorious leader, particularly in Europe. We're told mostly about D-Day and Normandy invasion, and we're told about the naval battles in the Pacific. But sadly, the United States does not really expound upon the great sacrifices that were made by the Chinese people, the contributions of China to World War II. Americans get very little of that, maybe a little bit of information on, say, the horrors of Nanking, not a lot. The other part of it is this: the United States, because of its geographical remoteness, they don't have most of the people here don't have a concept of soldiers that are fighting to protect their families and their wives and their children at home, making great sacrifices because their land and their home is under attack by foreign aggression. So it's very difficult for United States citizens to understand the Chinese perspective. And sadly, we are not taught here in history and in schools about the sacrifices and the contributions of China.
So you talk about how little American people are aware of China's critical role in the Second World War. Could you elaborate more on that? Why the Western media or textbooks long underestimated China's active role in the Second World War? We have noticed that they often portray China as just the recipient of aid.
Yes. Well, what has happened is, and I think part of it is, unfortunately, is that, to be quite frank, I live in the United States, and there are many people like me who spend their life fighting against and opposing imperialism and fascism. But I think that there's a very powerful element in our country that is, dare I say, in favor of imperialism and imperialist-minded, and that they make a conscious effort to cover up the sins of the imperialist countries. They've made an effort, unfortunately, again, to align with Japan and to rearm Japan and take actions that I think are unconscionable and that, to be quite frank, shouldn't be happening. So I think that there are very powerful elements in the United States that do in fact feel that China contributed to World War II, that China should be an ally of the United States, and that China is making great contributions in the world. But there is a powerful element in the United States government, particularly right now, who opposes China's rise and China's success. And I think that they probably feel that to expose to the people the sacrifices that China has made and how China has worked so hard to overcome these types of aggression when they were militarily outmatched, and that the Chinese government has done a great job of leading their country through a terrible and violent aggression against them, and to come out of that and to be successful. I think there are people in our government who would not want Americans to know that, because it would cause Americans to feel more of an alignment with and a lot more respect for not just the Chinese people, but the Chinese government and the Chinese way of leading their people forward.
Why do you think that's important for people in the Western countries to know about China's sacrifice in its battle against the Japanese aggression, which is critical for the Second World War?
Well, for one thing, I think it's important for people to understand the history of the Japanese aggression in Asia and in the region, so they can understand the importance of ensuring that that never happens again. There are forces now that are trying to rearm Japan, that are pushing Japan in the direction of violence, in the direction of returning to its imperialist roots, and I think that needs to be opposed. I think the United States wants to build bases and take aggressive actions inside of Japan, and I think Americans need to understand Japan's history regarding China, Korea, Philippines, and its other neighbors, so that they will understand the importance of ensuring that that never happens again, and in pushing our government to stop not just assisting China, but actually pushing China in that direction.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Hongyu, I want to come to you now. I know during the trip you also interviewed this gentleman, Mr. Zhang Guangsheng, in Shenyang, and he's the collector who collected items from Naoche's branch of the Imperial Japanese Army Unit 731. We know his collection really brings to life these historical details of Japan's biological warfare. So could you share with us the facts of the Unit 731, also some striking examples that you have discovered through your conversation and interview with Mr. Zhang Guangsheng?
Yes, well, in the early 1930s, Japan needed to expand its forces in China. Besides launching wars, they built up a site in Heilongjiang, in Harbin, actually, today's capital of China's Heilongjiang province in northeastern China. On paper, its name was like an epidemic prevention center and water supply center. Sounds harmless, but inside of the site was what people call a death factory, because they were secretly conducting experiments on live human bodies. And they were also studying bacteria that they could use for their wars against China. One of the most infamous experiments is called vivisection on conscious people. They got their so-called prisoners infected with diseases like cholera and the plague, and after they got ill, they got their organs outside from their bodies without anesthesia when they were conscious. So their pains and their horrors are just beyond every one of ours imagination. So, and another experiment is called frostbite experiment. They expose those prisoners in extremely cold weather, temperature, and then wait until their limbs became solid, like as solid as ice. And then they expose them to some hot temperature, like the open fire or hot water, to see which one could get them warm more quickly. So these inhuman actions are beyond our imagination. And in the little museum, the personal museum of Zhang Guangsheng, he showed us a set of dissection tools. There were scissors, there were hooks, there were saws that were once used in that site on live, warm human bodies. And when looking at it, I literally took cold breath and took a step back and I could feel that my hair was standing on their end. So I think the first trauma was the pains and horror that they brought to the Chinese people. And then they used some of the conclusions, the results of their experiments onto the Chinese battlefield. In the 1940s, they spread those bacteria into southern China, like into the rivers or on the grassland. So the local villagers and civilians could be infected with those diseases, and also the soldiers could be infected. And during their biological war, over millions of people were infected, and 2 million died from those diseases. So that is a great loss, not only to the Chinese army, but to the ordinary people in China.
The civilians. I want to come to Wes and Garland real quick. Have you heard of this, what Hongyu has just described before?
Unfortunately, I have been familiar with these events. There have actually also been films made of these events. You know, it's not just heartbreaking, but it's hard to even put into words how unimaginable of a crime against humanity what took place in those experiments.
Garland, is your first time hearing the...
No, it's not actually my first time. I've heard stories about that before. I do have a person who I interview weekly on my YouTube page, and we talk about a lot of international crimes by various intelligence agencies. And in our discussions about the United States using biological warfare in Korea during the Korean War against Korean and Chinese soldiers, we did get into discussions. We have gotten into discussions about the Japanese use of biological warfare on on several occasions, including this one, and of course the infamous unit that Japan had that did that. It in fact did continue with some of that activity after the war. So I'm familiar with it. It's horrible. It's horrible activity. But the reality is, I would say most people around the world aren't that, particularly in the West, that the Western governments and Western media does not report on those kind of things because Japan is supposedly now an ally, and it would opens people's eyes as to the potential that could come from arming Japan because of their terrible history of these types of acts.
Till today, the Japanese government still refused to fully acknowledge the war crimes, the inhuman war crimes committed, especially by the Unit 731 on Chinese soldiers and civilians. Why is that? And how important is it for the Japanese government to admit their crimes against the humanity?
Well, it's like if I were bullied and I somehow won in the end, the bully would not regret having bullying me. They would only regret not having been strong enough to win, because their mindset is still the same as those during the war. They don't admit or apologize because that's not beneficial to them after the war. It is the same logic as they violated the other countries. As long as it's not beneficial to me, I would not do it, regardless of whether it's moral or not. So it is this kind of logic that pushed them back from admitting or apologizing. Actually, admitting the crimes, the facts, or apologizing, or even giving people some compensation, that's not difficult theoretically. But what's more difficult for them is the display of an attitude. They're not, from my understanding, they're not fully abandoning hegemonism or power politics or such mindset, because one day, if they become the strongest again, they might still do it. So if they apologize or if they admit those crimes today, they would tell the world from a national level that they're abandoning those old mindsets. So that would be an attitude that they will display. So they don't want to show us this attitude. That's why they're not apologizing.
But that's not fair to people, their descendants who suffered from those warfare crimes.
Yes, definitely. And if they can really admit those crimes and apologize from a national level, first and foremost, that will be a great relief for the hundreds of thousands of victims and their descendants. Some of the victims are still alive today, waiting for their apologies. If they do that, that will be a great relief to all of those souls and their descendants. And second, this will add more stability and peace and hope to today's world. This will show the world that fascism is really fading out, not just because of their loss during the war, but also they're really rethinking about what they have done. And they are really willing to show the world that they regret it and they don't want those things to happen again. So that will bring more hope to today's world.
And also it will fix or rebuild the trust between China, Japan, South Korea, and also Japan, Philippines, like the victim countries suffered from the Imperial Japanese Army.
Yes, exactly.
Wes, this is also very tragedy cases happened during the Second World War, the Manila Massacre and the Nanjing Massacre. Although they happened in different places and at different times, they have striking similarities. For instance, they both targeted innocent civilians with extreme brutality and were systematic in nature. So in essence, both were crimes against the humanity. Given that background, China and the Philippines were victims of Imperial Japanese Army's war crimes. How do these similar traumas create common ground for the two countries to remember history, to defend the truth, and unite in preventing such atrocities from happening again?
The atrocities committed in both Manila and Nanjing are painful reminders of what unchecked militarism can bring. In Manila, as Filipino and American forces began to retake the city, tens of thousands of innocent civilians were massacred in just a few weeks as the Japanese forces began their retreat in a deliberate effort to punish the population, and is arguably one of the worst urban atrocities during the war's Pacific theater. Like in Nanjing, the violence was systematic, deliberate, and intended really to destroy the soul of a people. These were not just wartime tragedies, they were, crimes against humanity. This shared trauma, as you put it, between our nations gives us a solemn responsibility. The Philippines and China must continue to preserve historical truth, support the victim's memory, and resist any attempts to deny or revise what happened. But more than just remembering, we must also act through our own education, diplomacy, and regional dialogue to ensure that these tragedies never happen again. Let these memories not divide us, but unite us in a shared cause. Peace with dignity, truth without distortion, and justice that transcends borders.
Hongyu, let's focus on the international efforts in fighting against the fascism. One great example would be the Burman Road. It was the collective effort jointly built by China, the United States, Myanmar, the United Kingdom. It's the critical route that sends international supplies to China. Could you tell us more about the construction process? Because I know it happened at this very difficult time.
That was indeed a difficult time for China because in 1937, Japan blocked China's coastal ports in order to prevent foreign materials coming into China. So China needed those materials, and it needed a road linking China and the other allies so that their supplies could come in. Then Yunnan province decided to build a road linking Yunnan with northern Burma, or today's northern Myanmar. But that area was quite complicated. It's complicated even today. There are mountains, there are rivers, there are cliffs, there are mosquitoes that are much more infectious and bigger than those in northern China. So the situation was quite difficult. And China decided to finish that project within a year. That's very difficult, even for the experts from the United States and Britain. But they decided to do it, and they recruited over 200,000 Chinese laborers from Yunnan province and some neighboring areas. Those laborers not only include young people, but also their grandparents and parents, and maybe their children into this project. Back then, there was barely machinery in China, so they had to use their hands, their bare hands, and the tools in their hands that they brought from their homes for this construction project. And during that process, over 3,000 Chinese ordinary laborers lost their lives in those mountains. Some fell off the cliffs, some fell into the rivers, and many died from the diseases and the lack of medicine. And also 8 Chinese engineers also lost their lives. But that road was critical for China. They finished it within a year, and after 1940, the road became the only on-land path linking China and the allied countries. Not only were material supplies transported into China through this road, back then the United States and Britain needed a lot of non-ferrous metals, and those metals were transported from China to support those countries. So this road has quite important strategic significance. Cooperation is important because China was also on a very strategic point. China could hold back the Japanese forces, as we said. If China could hold back its forces, it will slow the pace of Japan going north into the Soviet Union or south into Southeast Asia and the Pacific. And back then, Burma was the British colony. So China's success or China's resistance was very important in the overall global anti-fascist war.
Let's take a short break. Coming back, we will continue our discussion.
Sideline Story brings you all things sports related. The hottest topics, latest events, juiciest stories, all with a very personal take. Subscribe to Sideline Story Podcast for heated sports discussions covering events that are happening in China and around the world.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Chat Lounge. Let's continue our discussion. Garland, we know China and the U.S. began jointly fighting against the fascism after the U.S. got involved in the war in 1941. The Burma Road and Hum Airlift are just a few examples of Sino-American military cooperation during that time. How do you view the spirit of cooperation between our two countries from that time, and how did this collaboration help turn the tide of the global anti-fascist war?
Well, I think it was important because at that time that was a critical area of the world, and because the connections between the Axis powers, the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Germans and the other, points of fascism could have come together and become very powerful. And I think it was important that they worked together to hold the line and to stop the Japanese from being able to, really be as effective as they wanted. Granted, China suffered a lot, but they were able to, take a lot of suffering and ultimately to be victorious. So I think it was critical. I think that a lot can be learned from that today. And I think particularly Russia and China having a long border, they should understand the importance of having very strong land routes to move goods around. So I think that it was important in the short run, in that it was one of the important points that helped stop the fascist powers from winning World War II. And I think in the long run, countries who have significant borders and who have significant trade can learn the importance of keeping those borders open and keeping their trade going between each other.
The West, during the war, the Philippines' anti-fascist struggle was not only about national independence, but also played a critical role in the global fight against the fascism. So how is the Philippines working today through, say, legislation, memorial activities, and through media to prevent the rise of militarism and make sure the history and peace values of the Second World War are respected and passed down? And where do you see maybe potential areas for cooperation between our two countries in maintaining regional peace and stability?
Well, today, the Philippines continues to uphold the memory and lessons of World War II through education, legislation, and public remembrance. We do have many commemorative events like Day of Valor, historical markers, and national shrines to ensure that our people, especially the youth, understand the sacrifices made and the dangers of repeating history. These are not just symbols, however. They are reminders that peace, once lost, comes at such a tremendously high cost. But beyond remembrance, we also understand that preventing the rise of militarism in our region requires practical strategies. Dialogue remains important. That cannot be understated. But so too does trade, economic cooperation, and building of mutual interest between nations. When countries are connected, not just by politics, but by shared prosperity and people-to-people exchanges, there is more incentive to preserve peace, and it lessens the appetite for confrontation. In this context, the Philippines is open to exploring areas of cooperation with all partners, including China, so long as it's based on mutual respect, transparency, and the welfare of both our nation's people. Our histories remind us of the consequences of unchecked aggression. Our present challenges demand that we work harder to create conditions where peace is not just an ideal, but a practical necessity for everyone. Pragmatism really needs to meet with partnership And that, I believe, is what will ensure stability in our region.
Garland, United Nations, one of the post-Second World War institutions, were established to prevent the tragedy of might makes right from happening again. However, in recent years, we do see a rise of unilateralism and hegemonic actions which go against the peace ideals that nations fought for during the Second World War. So as major powers in today's world, how can the United States and China cooperate to restore the spirit of the anti-fascist struggle and find common ground to promote positive cooperation in global affairs?
Well, right now it is quite difficult because the leadership of the United States currently are, acting fairly aggressively against China and struggling for hegemony. But I do think the potential is there. I do think that particularly if the United States and China can come together for some economic ventures together. One of the things that was suggested prior to the beginning of the Trump administration was that China is very successful in the area of building cars, and the United States car industry is getting weak. That they could potentially come together. Maybe some Chinese electric cars or something could be made in the United States. So I believe that if the United States and China could be aligned with some economic ventures, it could help overcome some of the aggressive rhetoric that's being used as propaganda in America, because those types of economic partnerships would help everyday Americans improve their economic situation. And I think that's important, to find ways that a partnership between the United States and China improves the economic positions of everyday American people.
Hongyu, let's talk about China's foreign policy today, because we know in modern history, China was the oppressed party during that period. But over the past few decades, it has grown stronger in terms of military power, in terms of its economy, and also overall influence. So how has that oppressed history that China had experienced in the past influenced or shaped China's foreign policy today, with the core of defending peace and striving for shared prosperity?
Well, history has proved to us that fascism would only bring hegemonism, discrimination, or the loss of human dignity, such as in the site of Japan's Unit 731. They didn't refer to those so-called prisoners as human beings. They called those bodies for experiments as logs. That means they didn't see them as human beings. They were just used for specimens, like the other animals. So what China is trying to do is to prevent such a thing from happening again, or preventing the rise of hegemonism or power politics. So I believe what China is doing right now with its initiatives that it's proposed, like the Belt and Road Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, the Global Development Initiative, and Civilization Initiative, this logic is the same. During the war, China fought against fascism, and then the invasion of the fascism powers failed. But fascism didn't die out eventually. It still exists today. And today, China is still fighting against fascism, but in another way. What is different from 80 years ago is that today's China is so strong. It's so strong that its voices can always be heard. And the world is eager to listen to what China has to say. So China is trying to voice for peace and for those less developed, those impoverished and the weak ones, so that hegemonism and the law of the jungle and the logic where the strong can devour the weak will not rise. So I believe what China is doing today is the same as what it did during the World War II. It is still resisting fascism and the rise of hegemony and power politics, but in another way, maybe in a more peaceful way.
Very well said, such as through the Belt and Road Initiative, to have all the developing countries and countries from the global south to join in and develop together. The more you're developed, maybe in the international stage, your voice will be heard more clearly.
Yes.
Wes, China and Philippines formed a deep bond through their shared struggle against the fascism, and today China is turning that historical friendship into practical cooperation, like through projects I mentioned, the BRI. So from Philippines' perspective, how does China's approach of shared future differ from the hegemonic power led by some countries in the West, and what special values does this cooperation have for maintaining regional peace and stability?
Well, it's all about building bridges. The Philippines welcomes partnerships that are based on mutual respect, national interest, and genuine benefits to our people. And I assume that's similar with all the other members in the BRI as well. China's stated approach of shared consultation, joint construction, and shared benefits offers an opportunity to move away from the post-Cold War cooperation models that at times imposed unequal conditions or external pressures. So today, the spirit of cooperation is already evident in practical ways, even in my own country. China is the largest source of steel imports for the Philippines, very necessary for construction and development. And Financials Technology empowers GCash, a key platform in our digital payment ecosystem. Lazada, a Southeast Asian subsidiary of Alibaba and my former employer, is one of our largest e-commerce platforms in the Philippines. It also supports thousands of local MSMEs here, not to mention provides many sellers and manufacturers in China on the Taobao platform access to the Philippine market. So creating a beneficial ecosystem for people in both nations and aligns with China's dual circulation economic strategy will really help build these win-win cooperations that help everyone involved, really creates value across the chain. And it's worth noting that some of our most successful Filipino entrepreneurs trace their roots to Fujian, China, as I mentioned. It's a real reflection of how deep and enduring our people-to-people ties are. At the same time, we also recognize the meaningful cooperation is not just transactional. It must respect sovereignty, follow fair and transparent practices, and ensure that local communities benefit. That is the kind of cooperation that Filipino people deserve, or everyone deserves, and is what we will always advocate for. I also want to emphasize the historical bond we share. When the WWII, the Chinese-Filipino guerrilla unit, fought alongside Filipinos during the Second World War, that shared resistance against fascism it's not just history. It's a reminder that unity must be built on trust, not coercion, and on partnership, not dependency. And looking ahead, win-win cooperation between China and the Philippines can be a force for regional peace if we remain rooted in mutual dignity, accountability, and respect for each nation's path.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Garland, even though there are competitions and differences between our two countries, the China and the U.S., both countries share common interests, such as in tackling global challenges, like in climate change, terrorism, and public health. Do you think the history of China-American cooperation during the Second World War can help revive the spirit of cooperation?
I think it can, and I think that is important, something we've been discussing, and that is it's important for the people to find out. It's important for the people of the United States to understand, because right now we are experiencing a flood of anti-China propaganda coming down, top down from the government. But as the people in the United States, who quite frankly are somewhat disenchanted with the leadership of our country right now, as they start to understand more about China's history, as they start to understand China's foreign policy. I don't know if you know, but one of the problems that President Trump is having right now is that the people who voted for Donald Trump, one of the things that they wanted was to fewer military entanglements in foreign policy. That the people in America are saying we want less war, we want less foreign entanglements, and the government is not, providing the the representation that the American people want, and that's kind of destabilizing our country. And I think that the more the American people learn about China, they can see China's successful foreign policy model as something that the United States could pursue. They can see the benefits in Africa. As a person of certainly of African descent, people in the United States who are of African descent are starting to take note of the African people and how China is, successfully raising a lot of areas in Africa up out of poverty through their win-win partnership foreign policy. So I think that the knowledge of China, the understanding of China's foreign policy, and the understanding of the outcomes of China's foreign policy and the history, going again back to the contributions during World War II and the partnership that the United States had during World War II to come up with the outcome that was necessary over fascism. All of these things need to be broadcast to the American people so that they can understand the potential for a positive relationship with China and the potential for improving the United States and the U.S. policies in a way that will benefit the working class people of the United States, unlike the problems that we're having today.
As we approach the end of today's discussion, I'd like to share a special interview clip with you all. So the clip features Mr. Zhu Weiji, whose father, Zhu Fuxing, as my colleague Hongyu has just talked about, served as the military official during the 1937 Battle of Shanghai. Mr. Zhu Weiji, he has an important message for our friends overseas. Now let's take a listen to what he has to say.
I
want to say two things to friends overseas. First, you need to know the efforts made by the Chinese people in a war of resistance against Japanese aggression. The Chinese people fought for 8, even 14 years and sacrificed 38 million lives. It was through the Chinese people's endurance struggle that China made a crucial contribution to the ultimate victory in World War II. Many people still don't know about this. Second, I want to tell everyone to cherish peace. Every country and its people should understand that we, the Chinese, have always valued peace and have never sought to invade others. Only when we all value peace, this hard-won peace, can we ensure a better life for our people. For example, during the Battle of Shanghai in 1937, the Chinese people suffered greatly. In World War II, people around the globe suffered greatly. It's only in a peaceful environment that we can live a happy life. I hope everyone remembers this lesson.
That's the message from Mr. Zhu Weiji. His father fought in the 1937 Battle of Shanghai. Wes and Garland, so what are your reflections on Mr. Zhu Weiji's words, both in terms of China's pivotal role during the Second World War and also the spirit of peace?
I want to thank Mr. Zhu Weiji for that heartfelt message. The pursuit of peace is a shared responsibility. It cannot just be one-sided to pursue it. And remembering history truthfully is part of that duty. The sacrifices of the Chinese people during World War II, both soldier and civilian, were immense, and they deserve greater recognition globally for that. As friends in the region, we honor those contributions alongside our own, not to dwell on the pain of the past, but to ensure that it never happens again. On a personal note, actually, my great-grandfather was among those who lost their lives during the war. So this must happen, or like many families in Asia, we carry those memories with quiet dignity. That's why remembrance is not just historical, it's deeply, deeply personal. Peace is preserved not by forgetting history, but by learning from it together and by growing from it together.
How about you, Garland?
One of the things I think that has happened today, I'll say this with me in interacting with my dear friends here. I think that it has helped me to understand the importance of helping to spread the information about the sacrifices that the Chinese people made during World War II and the contributions that they've made. You know, I have certainly studied the United States in World War II. I've done a lot of study about the Russian contributions as of recently about World War II. But I think it is important to also understand the Chinese contributions and to help spread the word to the American people about how the Chinese people worked in partnership with the United States for such an important goal, and that we do not want to squander their work. We do not want to make all of that hard work and all of those important outcomes in vain by allowing forces today who would act in aggressive manners around the world to bring about problems that could mirror those kinds of terrible times. And I think it is important to continue to do the work that we're all doing and to continue to take these messages back. Those of us who are watching around the world or participating from different parts around the world, I think it's important to take these messages back to our people and to help people to understand that we need to work together to reinvigorate the relationship between China and the United States in a positive way, and to appreciate and thank the people who have suffered, who have sacrificed, and whose family and ancestors have sacrificed to allow us to have the kind of world that we have today.
Hongyu, as media professionals, how can we ensure that the forgotten front is never forgotten again?
Each time when we commemorate our victory over fascism, there would be some voices saying that we're doing this to spread hatred. But that's just the opposite. We're doing that for anything but hatred. We're doing that for peace. Among all those people related to the World War II that I interviewed, including the workers at the Memorial Hall of the victims of Nanjing Massacre and the researchers of Nanjing Massacre and Unit 731, as well as the descendants of soldiers who fought on the battlefield, none of them talked about hatred. That includes the son of the soldier who lived the rest of his life with the Japanese bullet so close to his heart. They never talked about hatred. What they want is more peace. Because today we have great technologies and great conditions for us to live a better life, such as technologies, as some countries are trading attacks with drones. Some African countries like Tanzania and Kenya and South Africa, they're using Chinese drones with their agriculture. And there are also African students learning agriculture in China under the Belt and Road Initiative. So we want these wealth, these technologies to help people live a better life based on their own wealth and their own features of their land. So we can choose either to live a peaceful life, to live a better life based on our own characteristics and our own features, our own wealth, or fascism might rise one day and people may lose their dignity. And every one of us today could be a victim, and we don't want that to happen. So I think it is our responsibility to tell people that we commemorate our victory over fascism for the human beings. It is human beings' victory over fascism. So we're doing that for peace, for a better life, not for hatred.
May the sacrifices of the forgotten front serve as a powerful reminder that peace is never a given, but forged through remembering the past, honoring shared struggles, and choosing cooperation over division. With that, we conclude this episode of Chat Lounge. I'm Xu Yawen. I've been joined by Dou Hongyu, CGTN Radio reporter, Wes Cabangon, operations advisor and journalist at Business Mirror in the Philippines, Garland Nixon, a radio talk show host and political analyst from the U.S. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.
The best military commander is not he who fights 100 battles and wins every one of them. The best military strategy does not lead to the desiccation of the enemy's capital city.
Decoding the Art of War will help you understand why there's no art in war and how Sun Tzu stayed undefeatable using the science of war, with fun stories and insightful breakdown of famous battles. Find Decoding the Art of War wherever you listen.
Ever wondered what's actually going on in Africa through the perspective of an African? How are things really going between China and Africa? What's the narrative of this relationship? Well, get a perspective with China-Africa Talk. Hear from African diplomats, entrepreneurs, academics, Chinese natives, and more. Get on our wavelength every week to find out what's real with China-Africa Talk. Find us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, and more. We'll see you there.